There was a warmth the old mountain men felt on the worst nights and could never quite name. A wet, black cold that should have killed them, a blanket damp clear through, and yet something rising up out of the wool itself, faint and steady, like a breath the fabric was letting out in the dark. They called it many things or nothing at all. Some just said the wool was alive. What they were feeling was real, and it had a plain name they never learned, the fiber that makes heat. Think about what that means for a moment. Every blanket you have ever owned only holds the warmth your body gives it. It is a trap, nothing more. But the mountain men slept under a woven square of wool that did something no modern sleeping bag on the shelf can do. When the night turned wet, that blanket did not just hold heat, it made its own. It got warmer as the air got damper, and the men who trusted it lived through nights that should have been the end of them. So the question that runs under this whole story is a simple one. What did they understand about staying alive in the wet that we have completely forgotten? Because we have traded that old wool for gear that dies the moment it gets soaked, and we call that progress. My name is John Woods, and I want to tell you about the blanket that got warmer, the wetter the night became, and the mistake that let the cold win anyway. To understand the warm breath, you first have to understand the thing itself. One square of woven wool that a man would trade a stack of prime beaver pelts to own. So let us start there. Part 1, the 4-point blanket. Picture it laid flat across a bed of pine boughs, 72 inches wide, 90 inches long, heavy in the hand, with a set of short black bars woven into one edge. Those bars were called points, and a man could read them at a glance to know the size. 4 bars, meaning a 4-point blanket big enough to wrap a grown man twice over. These were not made in the mountains. They came across an ocean, woven in England from wool, chosen and blended to shed water, then carried thousands of miles west to the edge of the maps. And out there, on the far side of everything, a good blanket was not bedding. It was money. In the fur trade, a wool blanket was soft currency, handed across the counter of a trading post in exchange for the beaver pelts a mountain man had spent a whole bitter season taking. He would pay dearly for it, because he understood something a modern shopper does not. His life would ride on it. The mountain man did not own a closet full of options out there in the high country. He owned what he could carry, and what he carried had to earn its weight. So a single square of good wool had to be worth more than its price in beaver, because it was the difference between waking up and not. Now, why did it work at all? The first answer is the simplest one, and every wool sweater you own shares it. Look close at a single strand of wool, and you will find it is not straight. It kinks and waves along its whole length, a natural spring built into the fiber. When thousands of those springy, kinking strands are packed together into a blanket, they cannot lie flat against each other. They hold themselves apart, and in the gaps between them, they trap millions of tiny pockets of still air. And air, when it is held still and not allowed to move, is one of the poorest carriers of heat there is. So the blanket wraps the mountain man in a shell of trapped air, warmed by his own body, and the cold on the far side has a hard time reaching through. That is the dry warmth, the ordinary warmth, the kind most people half understand. But here is the thing. The spring in the fiber only explains why the blanket was warm on a dry night. It says nothing at all about the strangest thing these men swore by around 100 fires, the thing that sounds like a tall tale until you understand it. They swore the blanket got warmer when the night got wetter. And that brings us to the heart of it. Part 2, the fiber that makes heat. This is the part almost nobody alive today knows, and it is the whole reason that old wool beats the gear in the store. So slow down here. When damp air, the wet breath of a cold night, drifts against wool, the fiber does not shrug it off. It drinks it in. Each strand pulls water vapor down into its core and holds it there. And here is the part that matters, the part that feels almost like a trick. As those water molecules settle and bind inside the fiber, they let go of a small amount of heat, not heat from your body. New heat, made right there in the wool as it takes on the damp. The fabric is not just holding your warmth anymore. It is manufacturing a little of its own. This is not folklore, and it is not a guess. It is a measured thing. Every gram of moisture that wool drinks releases roughly 1 1/10 kilojoules of heat into the fiber. Multiply that across a whole heavy blanket, drinking the damp out of a cold night for hour after hour, and you get warmth a man can actually feel. A low and patient heat that rises just when the night turns its wettest and cruelest. The mountain man did not know the number. He did not need it. He only knew that on a raw, sodden night, the wool answered back. There is a plain name for how greedy the fiber is. Wool will drink up to 1/3 of its own weight in water and still feel dry to the hand. Think about that. A blanket can be doing this quiet work, pulling moisture out of the air all night and turning it into warmth, and the surface against your face still feels dry. That is the greedy fiber, and it is exactly what a soaking cotton blanket can never do. So here is the method, the thing a mountain man actually did with this knowledge, whether he could have explained it or not. He dried his wool by the fire before the cold set in. A blanket dried out fully has the most room to drink, and a thirsty fiber gives back the most heat when the damp returns. A man who bedded down under wool that had been baked dry by his fire was setting a trap for the night's moisture, and the payoff was warmth. But there is a mistake that ruins the whole thing, and it is worth knowing. The gift only comes while the fiber is taking moisture up out of the air. A blanket already soaked through with liquid water, wrung out and heavy, has nothing left to drink and nothing left to give. The warm breath is not magic that survives a dunking. It is a slow drinking of damp from the air, and a man who let his wool get truly waterlogged had thrown the whole advantage away. Which is exactly why the wrong thing worn against the skin could kill a mountain man on the same night the right blanket would have saved him. So let us talk about what the wool was up against. Part 3, the shed skin. Every choice out there was life or death, and nowhere more than in what a man wore and slept in. Buckskin was the picture everyone remembers, the fringed leather of the mountain man, tough and handsome and good in dry cold. But let it get soaked, and buckskin turned on you. It went cold and stiff as a board, and it pulled the heat straight off a man's body while it dried. Cotton was worse still, and the mountain men who had any sense feared it in winter. Cotton is a sponge that drinks water into itself and stays wet on the inside and the outside both, and a wet cotton layer becomes a highway for your warmth to escape down. There is an old plain saying for it that has outlived everyone who first said it. Cotton kills. Wool did the opposite. and it did it in 2 motions at once. On the outside, the fiber carries a natural waxy coat that beads and sheds liquid water, so a rain or a wet snow runs off instead of soaking in. On the inside, the core does its quiet drinking, that slow, warm work we already met. A wet wool blanket holds onto something like 4/5 of its warmth. A wet cotton one holds almost none. That is the whole difference between a rough night and a dead man. And the mountain man took this 1 square of wool and made it do more than one job. He would cut the blanket and stitch it, right there in camp with heavy thread, into a long hooded coat. The coat had a name, the capote, and it was nothing more than his blanket worn on his back. 72 inches by 90 inches of wool, wrapped around the body, overlapped in front, a hood cut from what was left. By day, the mountain man wore it against the wind and the wet. By night he pulled it over himself as a second blanket, or slept in it as it was, one object, worn and slept in, coat and bedding in a single piece of wool, and because it was cut loose and large, the mountain man could pull it on over every other layer he owned in the worst of the cold, then shed it and spread it flat when he needed a blanket instead. There was no separate anything. There was just the wool doing everything, and the man who carried it never had to choose between wearing his warmth and sleeping under it. But there was one more thing that wool did, something that happened right at the edge of the fire that no modern sleeping bag could ever survive, and that is the part almost everyone misses. Part 4. The ember that will not bite. Here is what even people who know this history tend to overlook. The last great advantage of that old blanket had nothing to do with warmth at all. It had to do with fire. A mountain man slept close to his fire on the coldest nights, close enough that sparks jumped and embers rolled. Now picture doing that in a modern sleeping bag, the kind made of slick synthetic shell. A single spark can melt that shell, and melted synthetic does not just burn, it sticks, fusing to the skin in the worst possible way. The mountain man's wool did no such thing. Wool is one of the hardest common fibers in the world to set alight. It takes a far higher heat to make wool catch than it takes for cotton or synthetic. Cotton will take a flame at a low heat, and slick synthetic melts and runs at a lower heat still. But wool holds out until the fire is roaring hot, more than twice the heat that lights a cotton shirt. And even when it does meet flame, wool tends to smolder and then snuff itself out rather than run wild. It does not want to burn, and it will not carry a fire across itself the way a lesser cloth does. The reason is built into the fiber. Wool is rich in nitrogen, and it always holds a little bound moisture deep inside, and together those starve a flame of what it needs to spread. So a stray ember landing on a wool blanket leaves a small scorched hole and nothing more. No sheet of flame, no melting, no fusing to the skin. Just a little burn mark, a story for the morning. The mountain man could sleep close enough to his fire to stay alive, without betting his life on his blanket not catching fire. And this is where the whole picture comes together. That old blanket outlasts the modern bag not because a laboratory would call it warmer. It outlasts it because it refuses to fail. It makes its own heat when the night turns wet. It sheds the rain off its back while it drinks the damp from the air. And it shrugs off the ember that would end a synthetic bag in seconds. The wool did not win by being the warmest thing in the mountains. It won by never once quitting on the man who trusted it. Part 5. The Warm Breath. Return now to that thing the old men felt and could not name, the faint warmth rising off damp wool in the dark. It was never magic. It was only a fiber that had learned, over more years than we can count, to work with the wet instead of fighting it. That is the whole secret. Everything modern we carry into the cold is built to fight the wet and to lose the moment the wet wins. The wool did not fight. It drank the damp and turned it into heat. It shed what it could not drink. And it did all of this without a single moving part, without a battery, without a thing that could break. Look at what the mountain man actually carried, and then look at what we carry. He had one square of wool. It was his blanket. It was his coat. It was fireproof enough to sleep beside the flames, and it made its own warmth on the nights that mattered most. We carry 3 separate specialized things to do those same jobs, and every one of them quits when the conditions turn against it. We have more, and we have worse. That is the trade we made and never noticed we were making. What the mountain man understood, in his hands if not in words, is the oldest kind of wisdom there is. The smartest tool you can own is not the one that performs best on an easy day. It is the one that does not fail you on the worst day, when everything has gone wrong and there is no second chance and no store to walk into. He bet his life on that idea every single winter, and the wool held up its end. So picture him one last time. A wet, black night. The fire burned down to a red glow, the blanket damp and heavy across his shoulders. And rising up out of that wool, quiet and steady, a warmth he never had to spend, a breath the fabric gave back to him in the dark. That is what we forgot. That is what one square of wool once knew how to do. I am John Woods. If you want more of what the old ones knew, and we let slip away, subscribe to John Woods, and I will see you next time.